Why good people become evil. Dostoevsky's warning. What turns good people into monsters? What if I told you that the most dangerous people in history didn't start as monsters? They started as people convinced they were saving the world. Dostoevsky saw this pattern everywhere, and he left us a warning we're still ignoring. In 1971, Stanford University ran an experiment that was supposed to last 2 weeks. Regular college students, screened to be psychologically normal, were randomly assigned roles as prisoners and guards in a mock prison. The study had to be shut down after 6 days. Why? The guards had become genuinely sadistic. They weren't acting anymore. They were forcing prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, making them do humiliating exercises, stripping them naked and leaving them in dark closets. These were kids who probably helped old ladies cross the street a week earlier. The researchers were horrified, but Dostoevsky wouldn't have been surprised. He spent his entire career mapping how ordinary people transform into something unrecognizable. Not through some dramatic corruption, but through a process so gradual and logical that the person never realizes what's happening. They keep believing they're the good guy right up until the end. The mechanism isn't external. Nobody forced those Stanford students to become cruel. The potential was already there, waiting for the right conditions to emerge, just like it's waiting in you and me. So here's what we need to figure out. What exactly is that mechanism? What invisible process takes someone who genuinely wants to do good and turns them into someone who causes real harm, while still believing they're justified? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you'll start recognizing it everywhere. Your moral blind spots are already active. Think back to an argument you had recently. Not a small disagreement, a real one where you felt genuinely wronged. Maybe someone questioned your judgment, challenged your values, or made you defend something you care about. How certain were you that you were right? I'm willing to bet you didn't just think you were right, you knew you were right. The other person wasn't just wrong, they were being unreasonable, maybe even a little stupid. You could see their blind spots clearly. But yours? Those stayed invisible. Here's what's uncomfortable to admit. You've already started the process those Stanford students went through. We all have. The difference is we're moving more slowly, so we don't notice it happening. You've probably justified keeping that extra change when the cashier made an error. Rationalize why your group's cause is more important than following certain rules. Found yourself defending positions that would have made your younger self uncomfortable? This isn't about being a bad person. It's about being human. We exist on a moral spectrum, and we slide along it constantly without realizing. Each small compromise feels reasonable in isolation. Each rationalization builds on the last one. The accountant who embezzles millions doesn't wake up one day and decide to steal. They start with small justifications, borrowing from petty cash, planning to pay it back, telling themselves the company won't miss it. What makes this so insidious is how our minds protect us from seeing it. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance reduction. When our actions don't match our self-image, we don't usually change the actions. We change the story. I'm not normally like this, but they deserved it after what they did to me. Someone has to take a stand. The system is corrupt anyway. Each story feels perfectly logical when we're telling it to ourselves. But here's the trap. The people who cause the most harm are often the ones most convinced of their own righteousness. The Stanford guards didn't think they were being cruel. They thought they were maintaining order. So what did Dostoevsky see that we're missing? He mapped out exactly how this transformation happens, not through dramatic corruption, but through a predictable three-stage process that turns moral certainty into moral blindness. And once you understand his framework, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Why this is getting worse right now. This isn't just an abstract philosophical problem. We're living through it right now. Look around. We've weaponized moral certainty in ways Dostoevsky couldn't have imagined. People don't just disagree anymore. They dehumanize. The other side isn't wrong. They're evil. And once someone becomes evil in your mind, anything you do to them feels justified. Online mob justice has made this instantaneous. Someone says the wrong thing, posts the wrong photo, holds the wrong opinion, and thousands of people who've never met them decide they deserve to have their life destroyed. Each person clicking share feels righteous. They're fighting the good fight. They're on the right side of history. But here's what should terrify you. Every single person participating in that mob believes they're the good guy. The Nazis didn't think they were evil. The Soviet revolutionaries who murdered millions believed they were creating paradise on earth. The Rwandan killers thought they were protecting their families. The Salem witch trials? Those people were saving their community from Satan. Every genocide, every purge, every moral catastrophe in human history was carried out by people absolutely convinced of their own righteousness. They had reasons. They had justifications. They had evidence that seemed overwhelming at the time. And we're doing it again. We've sorted ourselves into ideological tribes where questioning the group's orthodoxy makes you a traitor. Admitting uncertainty makes you weak. Showing empathy for the wrong people makes you complicit in evil. This is ideological possession. When an idea takes over your mind so completely that you lose the ability to think independently. You don't hold the ideology anymore. It holds you. The scariest part? The people most certain they could never fall for this are often the first ones to go. Moral pride makes you blind to your own moral blindness. But Dostoevsky saw something else, something that everyone who studies evil seems to miss. He didn't just identify the problem. He mapped out exactly how the transformation happens. And he did it while sitting in a Russian prison, watching ordinary men become monsters, and monsters become ordinary men. What did he discover that we still don't understand? The three-stage descent into darkness. Dostoevsky didn't just write novels. He wrote psychological case studies disguised as fiction. And sitting in that Siberian prison camp, watching men break down and rebuild themselves into something unrecognizable, he identified a pattern that repeats across cultures and centuries. The transformation from good person to moral monster follows three predictable stages. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. Stage 1. The Great Rejection. It starts with a single question that feels incredibly reasonable. Why should I follow these rules? In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov doesn't wake up one morning deciding to murder an old woman. He starts by questioning the moral framework that says murder is wrong. If there's no God, no transcendent authority, no objective moral law, then everything becomes a matter of personal calculation. The famous line, "If God doesn't exist, everything is permitted," isn't about religion. It's about what happens when you reject the idea that some things are inherently wrong, regardless of consequences or circumstances. This rejection feels liberating at first. You're not bound by arbitrary rules created by dead people or imaginary authorities. You can think for yourself. You're enlightened. But here's what Dostoevsky understood that modern psychology is only now catching up to. Moral frameworks aren't chains. They're guardrails on a mountain road. Remove them and you don't get more freedom. You get a cliff. Research from Yale's moral psychology lab shows that people who score high on moral relativism, the belief that right and wrong are purely subjective, are significantly more likely to cheat, lie, and harm others when given the opportunity. They haven't become more rational. They've become untethered. Stage 2. The brilliant justification. Once you've rejected external moral authority, your intellect becomes your new god, and your intellect has one job: prove you're right. The Underground Man in Notes from Underground represents this perfectly. He's incredibly intelligent, well-educated, and completely miserable because his intelligence has become a weapon he uses against everyone, including himself. He doesn't just do wrong things. He creates elaborate philosophical justifications for why those wrong things are actually sophisticated responses to an absurd world. His cruelty becomes evidence of his deeper understanding. His selfishness becomes existential authenticity. This is intellectual pride in its purest form. You're not just smart. You're smart enough to see through the moral pretenses that fool everyone else. You understand that kindness is weakness, that mercy is naive, that conventional morality is a tool used by the powerful to control the masses. Modern research on motivated reasoning shows exactly how this works. Once we've decided what we want to believe, our intelligence doesn't help us find the truth. It helps us construct better arguments for what we already wanted to do. The smarter you are, the better you become at this self-deception, which explains why some of history's most articulate monsters were also its most intelligent. Stage 3. The Great Inversion. The final stage is the most dangerous because it feels the most righteous. Evil doesn't just become permissible, it becomes moral. Wrong becomes right. Destruction becomes creation. In The Possessed, Dostoevsky's revolutionaries don't see themselves as murderers. They see themselves as surgeons, cutting away the diseased parts of society to save the healthy tissue. The more violence they commit, the more convinced they become of their own virtue. This is moral inversion. When your compass doesn't just break, it spins completely around. Up becomes down. Harm becomes help. The very intensity of the evil proves the purity of the motive. You see this pattern everywhere once you recognize it. The parent who screams at their child for their own good. The activist who destroys lives to save the world. The leader who crushes dissent to preserve unity. They're not lying when they claim moral superiority. They genuinely believe they're the good guys. The worse their actions become, the more noble their cause must be to justify them. Wait, let me tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine last year. She got involved in an online movement fighting what she saw as institutional corruption. Started with signing petitions, joining discussions, normal stuff. But gradually, the group's tactics escalated. Doxing opponents, harassment campaigns, ruining careers over single comments taken out of context. When I asked her about it, she didn't deny the damage they were causing. She justified it. "Sometimes you have to break a few eggs," she said. "The system won't change unless we force it to change." She wasn't a bad person who became good at justifying evil. She was a good person who became convinced that evil was good. And the scariest part? She was more committed to fighting corruption than she'd ever been to anything in her life. That's the final stage. When destruction becomes creation. When cruelty becomes compassion. when the very intensity of your conviction becomes proof of your righteousness. Dostoevsky saw this pattern playing out in the radical movements of his time, but he understood something that we're still struggling with. The people most capable of great evil are often the same people most capable of great good. The question isn't whether you're capable of moral collapse. The question is whether you're humble enough to recognize the warning signs in yourself. Because according to Dostoevsky, there's only one reliable protection against this three-stage descent, and it's not what you think. The one thing that protects you from moral collapse. Dostoevsky's answer isn't moral education or better intentions. It's not reading more philosophy or surrounding yourself with good people. It's humility. Not the fake kind where you say, "I'm just a simple person." The brutal kind where you honestly confront what you're capable of. Here's what he learned watching his fellow prisoners in Siberia. The worst criminals weren't the ones who admitted their crimes. They were the ones who maintained their innocence, who explained why they had no choice, who turned themselves into heroes of their own stories. The moment you become convinced you couldn't possibly be one of the bad guys, that's when you become dangerous. Because evil doesn't announce itself. It whispers justifications. It provides noble causes. It makes you feel like a warrior for justice while you're destroying lives. Dostoevsky saw this clearly because he'd been there himself. Before his arrest, he was part of a revolutionary circle, convinced they were saving Russia from tyranny, ready to use violence for the greater good. It was only in prison that he realized how close he'd come to becoming the very thing he thought he was fighting. That experience taught him something crucial about moral protection. The people most immune to evil aren't the ones who think they're good. They're the ones who know they're capable of great harm. This is why suffering matters in his framework, not because it's noble or purifying, because it strips away illusions. It shows you what you'll do when pushed to your limits. When you've seen yourself at your worst, you can't pretend it away. You can't rationalize it into righteousness. You have to live with the knowledge of what's possible. That knowledge becomes your protection. Because the moment you think you're incapable of cruelty, you stop watching for it in yourself. So how do you practically apply this? How do you develop the kind of humility that actually protects you? First, pay attention to your justifications. When you find yourself explaining why your anger is righteous, why your group's methods are necessary, why the other side deserves what they get, stop. That's the warning system. Second, notice when you feel morally superior, not confident in your position, superior to other people. That feeling of elevated righteousness, it's not proof you're right. It's proof you're vulnerable. Third, watch for ideological possession. When your beliefs become your identity, when questioning them feels like a personal attack, when you can't see any validity in opposing views, you've crossed a line. The mechanism behind moral collapse isn't corruption from outside. It's pride from within. The belief that your cause justifies your methods, that your group has special knowledge, that you're fighting forces so evil that normal moral rules don't apply. My friend from the beginning, she eventually left that movement. Not because someone convinced her she was wrong, because she finally heard herself justifying actions that would have horrified her 2 years earlier. The moment she recognized that pattern, the moment she saw how easily she'd slid from activist to aggressor, was the moment she started pulling back. That's Dostoevsky's real warning. Not that evil people exist, but that good people become evil through a process so gradual, so logical, so emotionally satisfying that we miss it happening. The only reliable protection is the uncomfortable knowledge that you're not exempt. That given the right circumstances, the right pressures, the right justifications, you could find yourself on the wrong side of history. That knowledge doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous in the right way. Dangerous to the forces that would use your goodness against itself. Because once you understand how moral collapse works, you can see it coming, in yourself and in others. And seeing it coming is the first step to stopping it. If you want to explore more of these psychological patterns that shape our behavior, there is another aspect of human nature that Dostoevsky understood better than almost anyone. The way we deceive ourselves about our own motivations. The stories we tell make our worst impulses feel noble,